Hello, students. This is Mrs. Moore coming to you with another reading slash discussion on Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I believe it is our fourth in this series. And I want to mention to you I'm using a different kind of camera, so I may look a little delayed, or sometimes I have to come up here and push a button when things get out of focus. But thank you for bearing with me. I'm just trying to learn different things about which technology works best. So you will recall that last time, well, you know what, before we begin, I want to say something. So I'm hoping that those of you who don't have your books have taken the advice of one of our students and found a way to have free access to Jekyll and Hyde, because the book is in public domain. There isn't a copyright on it. It is a public copyright. But part of the reason this is such a good book to read aloud together is, again, I stress this because the vocabulary is so difficult. And I taught this book many years ago when I was first teaching. And my husband has taught this book, and we've talked about this before, how it's quite a difficult book for students your age. Yet it's in the core knowledge sequence in the 7th grade. It's a wonderful book, but sometimes the plot itself, the way things happen so quickly, it can be very confusing and hard for students to grasp, not to mention the rich vocabulary. So I think it is a great book to listen to. And the thing about me versus if you had an audio book is I'm going to stop and explain what words mean to you. I'm going to stop and check for understanding. Some of you may not need that. You may understand it perfectly, and that's fine. Then maybe I'm not doing these lessons for you in particular, but for those of you who need help, this is a good way to do this. So you will recall that last time we were halfway through the chapter called, let's see, The Last Night. And we had, with a great deal of suspense, just had Mr. Utterson and Mr. Poole break down the door where someone was inside pacing, crying out, had been locked away with a weird voice, a weird step that wasn't Jekyll's. And on the floor they find the freshly dead by his own hand, so it's a suicide, the body of Mr. Hyde wearing clothes that don't quite fit him. It's an odd situation, and we're going to continue this chapter together. Now again, if anything confuses you, you can always privately ask me a question, or through the class comments or streams, because I'm sure your classmates would love to, on Google Classroom, they would love to talk to you and help you as well. But you can listen to things more than once. You can stop this. That's kind of another gift of doing this with an audio version. All right. So we see that they're looking upon this dead body, page 95. Utterson knew that he was looking on the body of a self-destroyer. We know that means suicide. "We have come too late," he said sternly, "whether to save or punish. Hyde has gone to his account, and it only remains for us to find the body of your master." So think for a moment. Who are they looking for still? Dr. Jekyll. Okay, now we've come too late to save or punish. Who do they want to save? Dr. Jekyll. Whom did they want to punish? Hyde. They can't punish him now, and they can't seem to save Jekyll. They don't know where he is. The far greater proportion of the building was occupied by the theater, which filled almost the whole ground story and was lighted from above, and by the cabinet, which formed an upper story at one end, looked upon the court. So just describing the way the rooms are arranged. A corridor, so hallway, joined the theater to the door on the by-street, and with this the cabinet commuted separately by a second flight of stairs. There were besides these a few dark closets and a spacious cellar. All these they now thoroughly examined. So many hiding places. They're looking through all of it. Each closet needed but a glance, for all were empty, and all by the dust that fell from their doors had stood long unopened. The cellar indeed was filled with crazy lumber, mostly dating from the time of the surgeon, who was Jekyll's predecessor. But even as they opened the door, they were advertised of the uselessness of further search by the fall of a perfect mat of cobweb, which had for years sealed up the entrance. So all of these doors haven't been disturbed in years. No one's there. Nowhere was there any trace of Henry Jekyll, dead or alive. Poole stamped on the flags of the corridor. He must be buried here, so he's stomping with his feet, he said, hearkening to the sound. Or he may have fled, said Utterson. And he turned to examine the door in the by-street. It was locked, and lying nearby on the flags they found the key, already stained with rust. This does not look like use, observed the lawyer. Use? Echoed Poole. Do you not see it, sir? It is broken, much as if a man had stamped on it. So they're talking about the key. Ah, continued Utterson, and the fractures too are rusty. The two men looked at each other with a scare. This is beyond me, Poole, said the lawyer. Let us go back into the cabinet. So it's all too mysterious. And here's the thing about this book. If you like a mystery, this is wonderful for you. You're really digging this. If you enjoy reading, what are other good mysteries? Well, in this vein, like Sherlock Holmes. I don't have a lot of patience for those personally. I don't like being taken with someone through the evidence. I like to look at the scene through my own eyes and think about it. So that's, for me, the problem of a narrative mystery. But if you've been frustrated with the fact that it's a mystery, the book kind of changes in the second section and becomes more of a deep moral problem that you can relate to more. Okay, so just bear with me. And if you're loving this mystery, then hot dog for you. This is your book. So they mounted the stair in silence, and still, with an occasional awestruck glance at the dead body, proceeded more thoroughly to examine the contents of the cabinet. At one table there were traces of chemical work, various measured heaps of some white salt being laid on glass saucers, as though for an experiment in which the unhappy man had been prevented. So remember, Hyde in that room calling for more medicine, more drugs. That is the same drug I was always bringing him, said Poole, and even as he spoke, the kettle, with a startling noise, boiled over. Wow, think about that. He has been dead such a short time, he'd put the kettle on for tea or for boiling or for whatever. So, and now it's finally boiling. This noise brought them to the fireside, where the easy chair was drawn cozily up, and the tea things stood ready to the sitter's elbow, the very sugar in the cup. There were several books on a shelf. One lay beside the tea things open, and Utterson was amazed to find it a copy of a pious work, so a religious work, for which Jekyll had sometimes expressed a great esteem or admiration, annotated, so full of notes, in his hand with startling blasphemies. So think of this. They find next to the chair, everything's all cozily laid out, a religious book. They look inside, and there are notes in Jekyll's handwriting that say things against God, blasphemy. So that is very much unlike Dr. Jekyll. That is startling. That is a startling thing to find. Maybe it shows something about his state of mind. Is it a clue? Well, let's see. Next, in the course of their review of the chamber, the researchers came to the cheval glass, into whose depths they looked with an involuntary horror. But it was so turned as to show them nothing but the rosy glow playing on the roof, the fire sparkling in 100 repetitions along the glazed front of the presses, and their own fearful countenances stooping to look in. So they see their own faces, they're afraid. This glass has seen some strange things, sir, whispered Poole. And surely none stranger than itself, echoed the lawyer, in the same tone. For what did Jekyll? And he caught himself up at the word with a start, and then conquering the weakness, what could Jekyll want with it? He said. You may say that, said Poole. Next they turned to the business table. On the desk, among the neat array of papers, a large envelope was uppermost and bare, in the doctor's handwriting. The name Mr. Utterson. How many letters is Utterson going to get? Secret letters. The lawyer unsealed it, and several enclosures fell on the floor. The first was a will, drawn in the same eccentric terms, an eccentric just odd, unusual, as the one he had returned 6 months before, to serve as a testament in case of the death, and as a deed of gift in case of disappearance. So remember, Hyde is supposed to take Jekyll's place and inherit all. But in place of the name Edward Hyde, the lawyer, with indescribable amazement, read the name of Gabriel John Utterson. He looked at Poole, and then back at the papers, and last of all, at the dead malefactor, so malefactor, bad guy, stretched upon the carpet. So this is odd. The will is now makes Utterson the benefactor. My head goes round, he said. He has been all these days in possession. He had no cause to like me. He must have ravaged to see himself displaced, and he has not destroyed this document. So he wonders why Hyde wouldn't be angry and have destroyed the will, because the legal will would still say that Hyde inherited everything. He caught the next paper. It was a brief note in the doctor's hand and dated at the top. "Oh, Poole," the lawyer cried, "he was alive in here this day. He cannot have been disposed of in so short a space. He must be still alive. He must have fled. And then why fled, and how? And in that case, can we venture to declare this suicide? Oh, we must be careful. I foresee that we may be yet involved. We may yet involve your master in some dire catastrophe. So, push this button. There we go. Why don't you read it, sir? Asked Poole. Because I fear, replied the lawyer solemnly. God grant I have no cause for it. So we're going to have him read it, but let's think about this for a moment. So they have evidence here that Jekyll was alive and in those rooms that very day, because he signed this paper and his name is at the top. So they wonder, where is he? Where is he? He's been here, but he's not now. So here's a letter from Jekyll to Utterson. My dear Utterson, when this shall fall into your hands, I shall have disappeared. Under what circumstances, I have not the penetration, the mental sharpness, to foresee, but my instinct and all the circumstances of my nameless situation tell me that the end is sure and must be early. Go then, and first read the narrative which Lanyon warned me he was to place in your hands. And if you care to hear more, turn to the confession of your unworthy and unhappy friend, Henry Jekyll. Okay, so think about that. Utterson has been directed now to go and open that letter in his safe from his friend, from their mutual friend Lanyon, who died of a fright just a few days ago. Okay. There was a third enclosure? Asked Utterson. Here, sir, said Poole, and gave into his hands a considerable packet, sealed in several places. So he has a letter from Lanyon to read, and then a letter from Utterson. The lawyer put it in his pocket. I would say nothing of this letter, of this paper. If your master has fled or is dead, we may at least save his credit. It is now 10. I must go home and read these documents in quiet, but I shall be back before midnight, when we shall send for the police. So, he's hoping in part to figure out what happened in such a way that Jekyll, whether he's alive or not, at least isn't going to have his reputation damaged by his association with Hyde, because he cares about his friend. Then they went out, locking the door of the of the theater behind them, and Utterson, once more leaving the servants gathered about the fire in the hall, trudged back to his office, to read the two narratives in which this mystery was now to be explained. So, I want to see whether I'm going to go on with this tonight. Okay. Now we're on to the chapter Dr. Lanyon's narrative. We're going to hear about his letter. You remember Dr. Lanyon? Oops. Here you are. It's more difficult to see with this kind of filming. There he is. This is page 103 for those of you following along. On the 9th of January, now 4 days ago, I received by the evening delivery a registered envelope, addressed in the hand of my colleague and old school companion, Henry Jekyll. So this is coming, the narrator now is Dr. Lanyon, to make sure we understand. I was a good deal surprised by this, for we were by no means in the habit of correspondence. I had seen the man, dined with him indeed the night before, and I could imagine nothing in our intercourse that should justify the formality of registration. So he's surprised to get a letter from his old friend because he sees him all the time. They don't write to each other. Why would you write a long letter to someone you see all the time, right? The contents increased my wonder, for this is how the letter ran. So, dear Lanyon, you are one of my oldest friends, and although we may have differed at times on scientific questions, I cannot remember, at least on my side, any break in our affection. So think about the meaning there. We may have disagreed over science, but we've always felt kindly toward one another. We've been friends. And think harder about that. Your parents, or maybe even yourself, politics or religion, these are big issues people argue about. I have a lot of friends who don't think the way that I do politically, and I care about them more than I care about whatever political issue it is. And so we just agree not to talk about those things, and we're still very good friends. So that's part of kind of learning to be adult, putting aside certain things that you can get angry about that aren't as important as individual people, really. So there was never a day when, if you had said to me, Jekyll, my life, my honor, my reason depend upon you, I would not have sacrificed my fortune or my left hand to help you. Lanyon, my life, my honor, my reason are all at your mercy. If you fail me tonight, I am lost. You might suppose after this preface that I am going to ask you for something dishonorable to grant. Judge for yourself. So the import of the letter, I need your help. And it starts with a way of asking it by saying, remember how I'd always help you? I need help. I want you to postpone all other engagements for tonight. Even if you were summoned to the bedside of an emperor, to take a cab, unless your carriage should be actually at the door, and with this letter in your hand for consultation, to drive straight to my house. Poole, my butler, has his orders. You will find him waiting your arrival with a locksmith. The door of my cabinet is then to be forced, and you are to go in alone. Okay, so come to my house. My butler's waiting. A locksmith is there to burst the door open, which implies the person inside doesn't really want him in there. It's a strange situation. You are to go in alone to open the glazed press, letter E, on the left hand, breaking the lock if it be shut, and to draw out with all its contents as they stand, the fourth drawer from the top, the third from the bottom. In my extreme distress of mind, I have a morbid fear of misdirecting you. But even if I am in error, you may know the right drawer by its contents, some powders, a file, and a paper book. This drawer I beg of you to carry back with you to Cavendish Square as it stands. So he wants him to go in, break into the secret drawer, get out this medicine, and a book. That is the first part of the service. Now for the second. You should be back if you set out at once on the receipt of this long before midnight. But I will leave you that amount of margin, not only in the fear of one of those obstacles that can neither be prevented nor foreseen, but because an hour when your servants are in bed is to be preferred for what will then remain to do. That sounds sketchy. Everyone has to be asleep for you to do this thing. Sketchy. At midnight, then, I have to ask you to be alone in your consulting room, to admit with your own hand into the house a man who will present himself in my name, and place in his hands the drawer that you have brought with you from my cabinet. So, someone's going to show up, say he's me. It's not me. Give him that medicine right into his hands. Then you will have played your part and earned my gratitude completely. 5 minutes afterwards, if you insist upon an explanation, you will have understood that these arrangements are of a capital importance, and that by the neglect of one of them, fantastic as they must appear, you might have charged your conscience with my death or the shipwreck of my reason. So it seems like a small thing he's asking, right? Come to my house. Lanyon is being asked this of Dr. Jekyll. Come to my house. Poole will let you in. Get this medicine. Go home. When all your servants are sleeping, answer the door. Guy's going to say he's me. He's not. Give him the medicine. Seems pretty easy. You just have to show up and give people things. However, if you don't do this, I might die or lose my reason. Wow. Confident as I am that you will not trifle with this appeal, my heart sinks and my hand trembles at the bare thought of such a possibility. Think of me at this hour, in a strange place, laboring under a blackness of distress that no fancy can exaggerate, and yet well aware that if you will but punctually serve me, my troubles will roll away like a story that is told. Serve me, my dear Lanyon, and save your friend H.J. Henry Jekyll. So, as I write to you, basically, he's saying I am as miserable as you can imagine, and you can make it all go away. Wow. P.S. I had already sealed this up when a fresh terror struck upon my soul. It is possible that the post office may fail me, and this letter not come into your hands until tomorrow morning. In that case, dear Lanyon, do my errand when it be most convenient for you in the course of the day, and once more expect my messenger at midnight. It may then already be too late, and if the night passes without event, you will know you have seen the last of Henry Jekyll. Wow. And now we're in Lanyon's voice again. Upon reading this letter, I made sure my colleague was insane. But till that was proved beyond the possibility of doubt, I felt bound to do as he requested. So think about what this means. Lanyon thinks Jekyll has lost his mind. But until I know for sure, I'm just going to play along with this. The less I understood of this farrago, the less I was in a position to judge of its importance, and an appeal so worded could not be set aside without a grave responsibility. I rose accordingly from the table, got into a hansom cab, and drove straight to Jekyll's house. The butler was awaiting my arrival. He had received by the same post as mine a registered letter of instruction, and had sent at once for a locksmith and a carpenter. The tradesmen came while we were yet speaking, and we moved in a body to old Dr. Denman's surgical theatre, from which, as you are doubtless aware, Jekyll's private cabinet is the most conveniently entered. The door was very strong, the lock excellent. The carpenter vowed he would have great trouble and have to do much damage if force were to be used. And you see what's funny about that? Funny, not ha-ha, but a little bit ha-ha funny. The carpenter's saying it would be a lot of damage to break this door down. Well, guess who just broke the door down? Right? Poole and Utterson. Okay. But this last was a handy fellow, and after 2 hours' work, oh my goodness, the door stood open. The press marked E was unlocked. I took out the drawer, had it filled with straw, and tied in a sheet, and returned with it to Cavendish Square. Here I proceeded to examine its contents. The powders were neatly enough made up, but not with the nicety of the dispensing chemist, so it was plain they were of Jekyll's private manufacture. And when I opened one of the wrappers, I found what seemed to me a simple crystalline of salt of white color. So he thinks Jekyll has been playing chemist. Okay. The phial, to which I next turned my attention, might have been about half full of a blood-red liquor, which was highly pungent to the sense and smell, and seemed to me to contain phosphorus and some volatile ether. So a volatile chemical, from your study of science, you may know, is kind of dangerous to hold, can change form quickly. At the other ingredients, I could make no guess. The book was an ordinary version book and contained little but a series of dates. These covered a period of many years, but I observed that the entries ceased nearly a year ago, and quite abruptly. Here and there a brief remark was appended to a date, usually no more than a single word, double, occurring perhaps 6 times in a total of several hundred entries, and once, very early, in the list, followed by several marks of exclamation. Total failure, it said. So, if you know anything about hypotheses in science, it sounds like an experiment is going on and data is being kept, though the method of keeping it is a little bit mysterious. All this, though it whetted or sharpened my curiosity, told me little that was definite. Here were a phial of some tincture, a paper of some salt, and the record of a series of experiments that had led, like to many of Jekyll's investigations, to no end of practical usefulness. So we see here Lanyon thinks Jekyll is nothing but a dreamer. That whatever he was doing probably led to nothing practical anyway. How could the presence of these articles in my house affect either the honor, the sanity, or the life of my flighty colleague? If his messenger could go to one place, why could he not go to another? And even granting some impediment, why was this gentleman to be received by me in secret? The more I reflected, the more convinced I grew that I was dealing with a case of cerebral disease. This guy has brain problems, he's thinking. And though I dismissed my servants to bed, I loaded an old revolver. Lanyon don't play. Oops. That's the lesson. Lanyon don't play. He's got his gun. He doesn't know what's going on, right? That I might be found in some posture of self-defense. So he's got a gun. He's ready. 12 o'clock had scarce rung out over London, ere the knocker sounded very gently on the door. I went myself at the summons, and found a small man crouching against the pillars of the portico. "Are you come from Dr. Jekyll?" I asked. He told me yes by a constrained gesture, like a nod, and when I had bidden him enter, he did not obey me without a searching backward glance into the darkness of the square. So he comes in, but he looks behind him. There was a policeman not far off, advancing with his bull's eye open, and at the sight I thought my visitor started and made greater haste. So the police make this guy nervous. These particulars struck me, I confess, disagreeably, and as I followed him into the bright light of the consulting room, I kept my hand ready on my weapon. Here at last I had a chance of clearly seeing him. I had never set eyes on him before, so much was certain. He was small, as I have said, and y'all, we know who this is. He was small, as I have said, and we know also why he's hiding from the police. With his remarkable combination of great muscular activity and great apparent debility of constitution. So something is wrong with the way he's formed. We've heard this again and again. And last but not least, with the odd subjective disturbance caused by his neighborhood. This bore some resemblance to incipient rigor, and was accompanied by a marked sinking of the pulse. So now Lanyon's talking about himself, his own reactions to him, the way his body, his breathing, his heart rate react to seeing this guy. And he just has a more scientific language for it than Utterson has, than his friend or his cousin Enfield had. They say, oh, there's some reason for aversion. Well, Lanyon's just saying my heart rate did this, I felt this way. At that time, I set it down to some idiosyncratic personal distaste and merely wondered at the acuteness of the symptoms. But I have since had reason to believe the cause to lie much deeper in the nature of man and to turn on some nobler hinge than the principle of hatred. That's a pretty amazing thing to say. You see, he's implying that somehow we are all born with this ability to know instantly what is evil and to recoil from it, to move away from it. And that's what Lanyon thinks now as he's writing to Utterson, that this isn't just a weird moment where I don't like this guy and that he's causing me to have a physical reaction to him, but somehow humans know to pull away from what is evil. And think about that gut feeling. I don't know if any of you guys have ever been in danger of some kind, but where you've had a feeling. I have. One time I went to a park in the middle of the city with my kids and didn't quite know where I was. And it wasn't the place for me. And my heart raced a lot. And I tried to stay calm. And some of it may have been exaggerated fear. I just wasn't in a place where I belonged, you know. And some of it may have been maybe nature's way of my staying safe, preserving myself. And sometimes when we question ourselves, then we can get into trouble if we don't listen to our gut feelings, right? So this is what Lanyon is saying. It's an interesting question. I wish that I could talk to you guys about it, but I'm going to pause there for now because we've reached 30 minutes. And next time we'll pick up with the rest of Lanyon's letter to Mr. Utterson. All right, guys, I missed you much and talk to you soon. Maybe. Toodaloo.